Well, friends, today's message is a little shorter than usual, and the reason is because after I finish teaching today, we have some special things that are going to follow the teaching segment. There's an important video. There is someone I greatly admire that I want you to have a few moments with. And then after that, we're going to have an opportunity to demonstrate and to practice what Jesus is going to teach us in today's parable. So if you're someone who likes to get a jump on the parking lot or get a jump to the kids section for kids checkout, please do not leave today as the sermon ends, because there are very important things that are going to follow that moment. Now, like many of you, I don't watch a lot of live TV these days because I stream most of the things that I watch, so I don't see as many TV commercials as I once did. Tonight's game will be an exception because you can't stream the Super Bowl commercial free. Super Bowl commercials are big business. NBC is charging a record $6.5 million for a 30-second commercial during tonight's game. That is up $1 million since last year. I guess inflation is affecting everything. Now, maybe the advertisers should hire Tom Brady, Hall of Fame quarterback. He's got some extra time on his hands. He could deflate those advertising prices. Oh, yeah, I did. You might be a person that thinks that it's insane that any company would spend a fortune on a 30-second commercial. Or you may be one of the people who would say, it all depends on what they get for their money. If a large company spends millions on a short commercial, but it drives up revenue by tens of millions, then is it a foolish expense or is it a shrewd financial move? Well, believe it or not, Jesus touches on this question in one of his parables. He builds a story around a man who got himself into trouble, but responded in a very shrewd way. Not a very honest way, but a very shrewd way. I'm going to read this parable to you from Luke 16. I'll just read the entire parable. Only takes a moment, and I think you'll want to follow along. Jesus told this story to his disciples. There was a certain rich man who had a manager handling his affairs. One day, a report came that the manager was wasting his employer's money. So the employer called him in and said, "What is this I hear about you? Get your report in order because you're going to be fired." The manager thought to himself, "Now what? My boss has fired me. I don't have the strength to dig ditches, and I'm too proud to beg. I know how to ensure that I'll have plenty of friends who will give me a home when I am fired." So he invited each person who owed money to his employer to come and discuss the situation. He asked the first one, "How much do you owe him?" The man replied, "I owe him 800 gallons of olive oil." So the manager told him, "Take the bill and quickly change it to 400 gallons. "And how much do you owe my employer?" he asked the next man. "I owe him 1,000 bushels of wheat," was the reply. "Here," the manager said, "take the bill and change it to 800 bushels. The rich man had to admire the dishonest rascal for being so shrewd. And it is true that the children of this world are more shrewd in dealing with the world around them than are the children of light. Here's the lesson. Use your worldly resources to benefit others and to make friends. Then when your possessions are gone, they will welcome you to an eternal home." I think this is the most surprising parable that Jesus ever spoke. And the reason is because he uses a bad guy to make a good point. The main character in this story is a shady, conniving opportunist. And he does not seem worthy of the starring role in a story that is told by Jesus the Savior. Jesus calls him a dishonest rascal, so he's not overlooking his faults. And yet, he challenges us to learn something from this character. So I want to highlight what I'm going to call 3 glaring truths that we can learn from our ethically challenged friend in this story. The first one is that everything we manage in this life belongs to someone else. Now, many of us have heard this before, but if you're like me, it is just so easy to forget this principle. Because in our hearts, there is just this natural drift toward the mentality that the direct deposit that went into my account a few days ago, the money in my retirement fund, the equity in my house, the value of my car, the inheritance you may have received from someone, the business that you legally own, there is just a strong tendency to think of those things as strictly, solely ours. There's a reason one of the first words that any of us learn as toddlers is mine. After the government takes its share, the rest is yours, right? Well, if you're speaking strictly in human terms, there is a sense in which that's true. But if there is a higher being, friend, there is a higher truth. Psalm 24:1 says, the earth is the Lord's and everything in it. It's not just talking about nature, it's talking about every person and everything that is owned or managed by every person. And this is why Jesus told this story the way he did. The parable includes not just a rich person who makes decisions, but a wealthy owner and a questionable manager, because God is our wealthy owner, and we are the managers who so easily forget who actually owns it. A friend told me that when Shaquille O'Neal hears his kids say that their family is rich, he reminds them, no, we ain't rich, I'm rich. But I've learned that a person does not have to be rich to forget that the resources that we manage belong to God. We are all wealth managers. Now, many of us don't use that word to describe our possessions, but the owner of whatever we have is wealthy. We are wealth managers. And God entrusts us with different amounts of that wealth. Jesus told another parable that talked about how God gives different amounts to different people. And he welcomes us to use some of it for ourselves because he cares about us, but he does not want us to forget who the true owner actually is. I read about a Texas landowner who drilled and tapped into a huge oil reserve. And it was big news around town. So a friend saw him a few days later and asked, how did it feel to wake up one day and to have twice as much as you did the day before? And the man replied, I own the same amount today that I owned a week ago, 0. But I do feel a greater responsibility because God has entrusted me with even more. Now, when you hear words like that from an actual person, you're not hearing from someone with an owner's spirit. You're hearing from someone with a manager's spirit. And as you kind of look in the mirror of your soul today, what do you see? Do you see an owner's spirit or do you see a manager's spirit? You know, this is a good test for whether or not you've realized this truth. If more resources have come under your care over recent years, have you felt a greater sense of importance, a greater sense of privilege, or have you felt a greater sense of responsibility? Have you enjoyed the thought that you now have to answer to less people, be dependent on people for less of your future? Or have you had a greater realization that you answer to God for even more? That leads me to the second glaring truth. Every account you and I manage is temporary. None is permanent. In the book of Revelation, there is this haunting passage in chapter 18 about the fall of Babylon. Now, the strange thing about that is that Babylon actually fell centuries before that part of Revelation was written. So the passage is looking into the past and offering a warning to people in the present and in the future. And in that passage, a voice from heaven describes how the kings and the merchants of Babylon presumed that their power and their wealth would always be a part of their lives. They thought it would last forever until it didn't. Verse 11 of Revelation 18 reads, "The merchants of the world will weep and mourn for her," Babylon, "for there is no one left to buy their goods." Their economy was disrupted. Now, why are they weeping and mourning? Well, they failed to realize that every financial arrangement, Every business deal, every income stream is going to end unless temporary things are used for eternal purposes. In Jesus' story, this shrewd manager lived as if he would remain in a position of influence and as if he would be a person of affluence forever and ever. But then the owner brought all of that to an end when he called him to report on his dealings, and just like that, it ended. This is a sobering but important reminder. Your place in this world is temporary. My place in this world is temporary. Any assets we have, any net worth we would claim to have, all of it is temporary. By extension, since we are temporary, everything under our care is also temporary. In fact, some of those things will outlast us. They will be here longer than we are. So what will we do with the resources that God has entrusted to our care in the limited time that we control them? Here's the final glaring truth I want to share: that temporary things are best used for eternal things. In the parable, Jesus said, use worldly resources to benefit others and to make friends. And he goes on to suggest that there will be eternal benefits for us if we will do this well. Yesterday, my wife and I had a lunch guest at our home, and she shared a moving example of what Jesus is saying here. So I altered my sermon. I met my friend Mary Kamau 15 years ago on the other side of the world. She and her husband Wallace have led a great work in Kenya for the last 15, 20 years, a work with an amazing impact that you'll hear more about in a moment. Well, Mary visited a remote town recently, and this town had been visited by other people, other organizations, other agencies who wanted to help the desperate, destitute people who lived there. However, the practice of witchcraft in that region had made it such a dark and dangerous place, they had all given up. No one was still there. And Mary went there, and she, as Jesus put it in this story, she made friends with the people. And during their conversation, without any prior plans to do so, she felt God was prompting her to tell the people of this town that Missions of Hope would open a school there 2 weeks from that moment. Opening a school is one thing. Opening a school in 2 weeks, that sounds impossible. No prior plans, no church in the United States saying that they would fund it, just Mary believing that God was prompting her to do this. So she and her team embraced this opportunity, and 2 weeks later, a Christian school opened in a place that had been written off by many people and organizations. Well, the last time Mary traveled to that place, the town gathered and they cheered because for the first time, their community has hope and their children have hope. Their kids are not just learning academics in this school, as important as that is. They are learning the Word of God. They are coming to know their Savior, Jesus, and there are plans to ultimately have a church in that area. I have a remarkable friend, don't I? And I admire her so much. She is your friend too. Some of you know her. She has hundreds of teammates, co-workers in Kenya who are on mission with her and her husband Wallace. Mary Kamau is the kind of person that you want as a partner if you are a church in the United States that is looking to impact other parts of the world. But for the school and the church that I mentioned to be sustained, someone like you, someone like me must say, I am only a manager. I am managing my owner's resources for only a short time, and I must use those resources to make friends and to have an eternal impact. Well, I strongly suspect that many of you want to take this opportunity, and I suspect that you'd also like to meet and hear from my friend today. Let's watch this video together, and then Mary will come out and you'll get to hear from her.
Despite the complex and often overwhelming magnitude of spiritual and physical poverties
Well, friends, will you welcome one of my favorite people, one of the finest leaders I know, Mary Kamau? Well, Mary, I've been fortunate to see some parts of Kenya other than Nairobi, other than the slums. It's a beautiful country. There's so many good things about that country. But you and Wallace have chosen to invest your lives in these places where people are destitute, where there's a lot of desperation. Can you just give us an idea of the scope, the magnitude of that challenge?
Yes. In Nairobi, Kenya, we have about 6 million people living in the city, and over 70% of those people live in the slums. When I talk of the slums, it's a community like Mathare Valley slums, just one of them, the oldest slum, which has about 800,000 people living in an area that is only half a mile wide, 3 miles long. And so you can imagine the people are kind of packed in there. You'll find families of 6 to 8 children living in a shanty that is only 8 by 10 feet. And you find that they have no running water, no electricity, sewers run everywhere. And most of these families, children, they don't have an opportunity for education. They don't have opportunities to have proper food. And so those are the ones that are living in the slums. But then also in Kenya, among the rural communities, there are some communities where it is so desperate. They have never had any opportunities for their children to get any form of education or health care or anything that can really help them be able to live the kind of life that Jesus would want them to live. They have never heard about Jesus. And so those are the people that we are called to minister to.
So there's extensive and deep poverty, millions of people in the city. When I first visited you in 2007 with several of my pastor friends, you'd established a school in Bondeni, which is part of the Mathare Valley, there in the slums. And that school was reaching a little less than 300 people. I think you had just started a school in the Kosovo section of the Mathare Valley, maybe 80 students there. Can you give us an idea of how that work has grown and how your reach has grown over the years?
Yes, so Pastor Eddie and his friends came in March of 2007, and that time we had only a few children, but then we had so many children that we had put on a waiting list, hoping that one day, someday, God will provide resources and we can be able to educate these children. And so after their visit, Eddie actually told us, we described different villages, and he was like, we want to partner in Bondeni. And Bondeni was the worst slum at that point, and we started partnering there. And over the years, from 2007 March, at that point, having like 360 kids total, September of the same year, the number shot to 938. January of 2008, the number increased to 2,140, and the numbers have continued to increase because of our partners and pastors like Eddie just bringing many people to support the kids. And so as of today, we have over 22,500 children in 30 different locations throughout the country.
Over 22,030 locations, and if you include their family members, you said 6 to 8 people live in each of these little shanties in the slums. So the impact on people is 6 digits and beyond. And so it really is an amazing reach. And as a leader in an organization, I just think about the scale that it requires to reproduce leaders and equip people. And the leadership that requires. I'm just so grateful that you and Wallace and your team of leaders have decided to spend your lives in this work, and that we've been able to come alongside and partner with you. Westside has focused our investments primarily in the Bondeni region of the slums, and then A few years ago, you told us about a Muslim community called Morikani. It took a short plane ride for us to make it to Morikani and visit it for the first time. Can you just give us an update on how Bondeni is doing and how Morikani is doing?
Yeah, so Bodeni community in the slums used to be known as the worst, most dangerous area in Mathare Valley. And so after we started working there, kind of the gangs that used to be there have now changed. We have seen people's lives being transformed. As a matter of fact, we have a church plant there. Pastor Stephen Owino is our pastor there. And by the way, previously, he used to be also part of the gangs. And now he's a pastor. And then we have some of them have started looking at ways they can reach out to their friends who are also in gangs and rehabilitate them and have their lives changed. Our school there has more than 1,200 kids, and we have had some of the students graduate, go through the school and through high school, and they are now back working with us in Missions of Hope. Some of them are camp counselors, because we just started a discipleship camp for our 6th graders, and very exciting things are happening. Our 7-story building in Bodeni is going to be the first building in Mathare Valley to have an elevator, and that is exciting, and the kids are really looking forward to the elevator being installed. And then in Morikani, 5 years ago, when we learned of this community and God called us to this community, again, Eddie and the leadership here said, yes, we will go with you to that community. And we now have a pastor who is doing discipleship ministry there. And we have 420 kids that are attending our school in Morikani. And everybody in that community loves Missions of Hope. And they know we are a Christian organization, but they are happy that we are taking care of their children. And the community is so open to us. Initially, they had given us 6 acres of land, but they recently increased that to 50 acres of land so that we can do a primary school, a high school, and also a health center for both medical and dental services. And it is so exciting to see what God is doing.
Well, it's amazing. And the plans that you're making are so inspiring also. This is exactly what Jesus talked about in the parable we looked at today. Use worldly resources to make friends and to make an eternal impact. And that is what you're doing. It's what we are able to do because you're the folks whose hands and feet are involved directly in the work. It's amazing. So will you tell us, when we sponsor a child through Mohi, what happens?
When you sponsor a child, $38 a month, this is giving that child a lifetime opportunity for their destiny to be changed and to be shaped. And this gives an opportunity to the child to get to know about Jesus and eventually be able to make a decision to get baptized. And they also give us an entry point to their families so that we are able to minister to their families, evangelize to them, and connect them to a local church. And each child, when they come to our school, they are able to get 2 meals a day for every day they are in school. They get Christian teachers, they get school supplies, they get a school uniform, and this just means the world to them and to their family. Because again, when we work with the families, as we evangelize to them, we are able to identify other areas of need. We provide health, education, but also economic empowerment so that they can be able to earn a living in a better way and be able to take care of their families. And it is very empowering. And as we evangelize to them, then their hearts become even more open. And of course, these families are the ones that make up the communities. And that is how the transformation of the communities happen. And so when you sponsor one child, it doesn't just stop there, but it goes to the family and their community, and that is transformational work.
Well, that is an amazing opportunity for these children when you consider their circumstances. But are they seizing that opportunity? Are you seeing that all of the things that your team is investing in is making a difference as these children grow older?
Yes, so much difference because most of these children come from families whose parents never had an opportunity to get an education. Their parents had no other alternative other than, the kind of things they do in the slums. But then when these children get an education, that is actually breaking the cycle of poverty in their families and over generations. And some of these children, they have gone through our program and they are now working. Some of them are working with us, and others have gotten jobs with other organizations and companies. And it is amazing to see the kind of transformation that is taking place. And some of them are now serving in our local churches as well as volunteers.
So the impact on these kids and their families and on the city, on their communities, and then we haven't even had an opportunity to talk about the churches that are being planted, the church leaders that are being trained and raised up. It's an amazing opportunity for us. Thank you so much. I could ask you questions all day, and I'd love for people to hear more, but I wanted everyone to get a taste of the incredible things that God is doing through Missions of Hope. Will you thank Mary for being with us today? Thank you, Mary.